One of the principles of warfare is concentration of force. One of the basic principles of warfare is concentration of force. An army spread out along a vast battle line is not nearly as potent as when it focuses on a particular point. Concentration of resources is also a force multiplier. So when more of those troops, more of those resources are brought to bear at a particular point, and all that pressure is pressed at one point, it multiplies the force exerted, meaning that the overall momentum is exponentially increased. The sum result is more than all the parts working alone. And therefore, a numerically smaller number can have a disproportionate impact at a decisive point, which can then overwhelm the enemy. So for example, in Leviticus 26, God promises this kind of blessing. He says, "And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword." You notice those numbers. So 5 to 100, that's 5%, right? And 100 to 10,000 is a 1% ratio, right? This principle applies to evangelism, worship, education, business, and media. Where God's people band together in humble obedience, there is often a force multiplier. What a few dedicated people can do at a particular point is multiplied, is exponentially increased. Now, of course, all of this still completely depends upon the blessing of God. If we don't have the blessing of God, it's nothing, it's worthless. And God is always free to save with many or with few, like Gideon's army, for example. But even Gideon's army is actually an example of this principle of concentration. Even Gideon's army, 300, right, relative few, but it's still an example of the principle of concentration. A vastly smaller force amassed at a key vulnerable point. A vastly smaller force amassed at a key vulnerable point. And notice what they did. There was only 300 of them, but God tells the 300, okay, we're going to go in the middle of the night. We're going to go at the time of the change of the guard, the changing of the guard. And then each one of the 300 goes with a trumpet and a torch hidden in this clay vessel, this pot. And at the signal given by Gideon, they're going to break open those clay jars. These torches are going to burst out in the night sky. They're all going to blow their trumpets. And you've got this changing of the guard. It's the middle of the night. Everybody's groggy. And their eyes are still getting adjusted to the darkness. And all of a sudden they hear trumpets blaring on every side and lights, torches bursting out in the darkness on every side. And you know, in the ancient world, frequently, whole regiments of soldiers were led by a guy with a trumpet and a torch. And so the impression given is that they're not surrounded by 300 men. That's not the impression. The impression given is they're surrounded by 300,000 men. They're surrounded by thousands and thousands of troops simply based on this concentration of force in one point, one key vulnerable point. So this is one of the great blessings of a larger church. Here we are, about 3,000 of us Kirkers in Moscow. Right now, if you take 1% and 5% as those sort of small numbers that chase the larger numbers, so we're right now, God could send us against 300,000, given those numbers. I'm not trying to be wooden here or anything, but I'm just saying that's the kind of thing you ought to be thinking about. There's about 2 million people in Idaho, okay? So let's, maybe when we get to 30,000, we're ready for, you see what I mean? But we don't, God saves with many or few, and at the same time, as he multiplies, we ought to be thinking in terms of the blessing of concentration.